Our last session of the day is a fireside chat. Richard Mason, he is the President and CSO of Critical Infrastructure and former CISO of Honeywell, will be interviewing Taylor Lehmann, CISO at Athena Health. Their fireside chat is entitled Real World Best Practices for IoMT Device Security. Go ahead, Richard.
Hi, folks. Can everybody hear me okay? Can I get a thumbs up from somebody? There we go. Outstanding. Good to see you, Taylor. Hi, everybody. Rich Mason here. I'm a former CISO, former Chief Security Officer and CISO for Honeywell International. That's a conglomerate. You might have seen them in the news of late. They did lean in quite heavily to the PPE shortage, setting up a couple of factories there. We can maybe touch on that during the Mission Matters part of our conversation today. But I am now a Ronin CISO, semi-retired, last 5 years independent under a banner of critical infrastructure. Allows me to spend a lot more time with really fascinating people, and in that sense, I get to meet people like Taylor. Taylor, as you may well know, also on the board of directors for ISAC, a very active member of an organization I'm closely affiliated with called Security Tinkers. And he's currently with Athena Health and formerly with Tufts, part of the Wellforce family. Taylor, good to see you, brother. We call this a fireside chat, so I did get the leather chair ready. Unfortunately, the pipe and the smoker's jackets are on back order from.
Fire. Where's the fire?
No fire.
Yeah, no, good to see you. Glad to be here. Thanks for facilitating, and hope everybody's having a good day.
Sure. So yeah, we don't have a lot of time, so just wanted to dive right in. So Taylor, maybe you can help me as someone who is not core to the healthcare sector. In the first 90 days of when I was a CISO, inventory was a big deal for me. Wanting to know what it is that I'm obviously protecting, where's the intellectual property, and focusing on that. I've seen the commercial where a medical student will be walking around with the doctors doing the tour. If I was in that shoes, I'd be pointing at everything saying, what's that do? What is that? What is that? But medical students hopefully get a sense already of what they are and what they're looking at. I'm assuming you're a non-medical student. How did you make that adjustment in your first 90 days of figuring out what the heck everything is and what it does, and trying to prioritize what's top of the inventory family?
Yeah, it's a good question. So working in a hospital, no two hospitals are the same. So, speaking not my experience now, having worked in a hospital for, ever, it feels like, trying to have an academic understanding of how a hospital is laid out will only get you so far. You really need to get out and, really walk the halls, meet the people, and in some cases, what I did in my first 90 days, beyond talking to other CISOs who worked in hospitals, was throwing the scrubs on and pretending you're a medical student. That means going and visiting patients, going and watching and seeing the technology that's used in the medical facility, the role it plays in clinical care delivery, talking to people about simple things like how long has it been there for, how old is it. When it breaks, who do you call, right? You have to be present for those opportunities to then learn, and then you get a better sense for, what's the real challenge on the inventory side. I feel like if you came in with a traditional security practitioner's role and you demanded an inventory, you'd fail miserably working in healthcare. So you really need to get out there and understand the clinical operations. And I'd say that's probably true for any kind of business, whether it's a hospital, a bank, or whatever. But in healthcare, the unique thing that, really seeing it really helps you understand is, like no other industry, the equipment, the tech that we use is critical to saving people's lives. And there's no, to me, there's no other industry like that. There's no other type of technology that plays that role that's just so close to human safety. And, you got to see it to appreciate it. My point. And then once you understand it, you can start to understand the inventory problems, and then understanding what you have, you can design a security strategy. But it really starts with throwing the scrubs on and go pretending you're Dr. McDreamy and, getting out there. Yeah.
It may have got you a date in your younger days. Yeah.
Yeah, no. Not with this thing right here. So.
I know as again as an outsider, I've made the mistakes of what's a respirator versus a ventilator versus an oximeter. You know, there's just so much tribal knowledge there within the healthcare sector. How do you stay on top of it all and understand that these are really the top of the stack, the crown jewels, if you will? When we talked before, you mentioned something about I think it was a pneumatic tube, which was intriguing, right?
Well, I guess it kind of goes back to that experience, right? You got to be out in the clinical operations to see it. And like, for example, in one instance when I was looking at how drugs were being moved from floor to floor at one of our large hospitals, you tend to see tech where you didn't expect to see it. In this case, a pneumatic tube system was pumping drugs from the pharmacy where it was being literally made by hand through to the cancer treatment center or the surgical units or the labor and delivery ward. And things like that, if you imagine a scenario where what could go wrong and that thing breaks or gets ransomware or whatever, you start to see, wow, the entire hospital, right? From one single system that probably wasn't on your radar to basically having to send patients home and reschedule appointments. And there's tech like that out there that you unfortunately, the only way you're going to see it is the only way you're going to find it is by going out and looking for it. And there's no whiz-bang way to do it. Now, there's ways to, the one commonality I'd say that exists across medical equipment that I found to be particularly helpful and typically consistent is the fact most of it is network connected, but it doesn't give you the context you need to actually understand how important it is, right? So you can find it, you can see it, but until you see the role that respirator plays over that respirator, right? There may be two, but one may be a crown jewel and the other may be junk. You need to get out there and actually experience the clinical operations and keep it up. One of the things that I was lucky to do was actually every week getting out and, touring a different business unit, walking through their inventory of what was critical, seeing it for myself, and then asking questions about it. Those were good techniques. And ultimately, it led to a better, more automated strategy for managing equipment, but it gave you a sense for what was critical because you could see it being used. And then you can extrapolate those sort of conclusions across a larger health system and start to get into risk modeling with different types of methods and methodologies.
It's interesting. When I talk to other CISOs in other sectors, I've heard this refrain before that inventory is not a hill I wish to die on as a CISO, and I completely sympathize with that sentiment. I'll say pre-COVID. Inventory is not a problem in many people's eyes because everybody has one. Most people have multiple inventories. CMDB is often owned by IT. If it's not mature, there certainly is a burden that falls on security to lean into that gap. And one thing that occurred to me, at least during COVID, is everyone talks about flattening the curve, and that's usually about people doing social distancing, staying at home, keeping people out of the hospital rooms. But flattening the curve, at least you flatten the demand curve, but you can also increase the supply curve, right? What can we do with the assets that we already have? So optimization of the assets, where they're staged, how many do we have? Do we have a strategic stockpile? Can we lean into somebody else's strategic stockpile? All of these things about optimization is another key role of inventory. Have you seen security folks, leaning into that problem and having more of a strategic role beyond the security of those devices, but actually helping save lives by increasing the supply side?
Yeah, so it's an interesting question. I think just to maybe react to one point you made earlier. So like inventories exist for specific purposes. There's never one inventory that matches all of them, which is why we end up with the spreadsheet, the CMDB, the other thing, and we still don't have an inventory, right? And largely it's because there's the level of integrated effort to pull together a fully faceted inventory that's useful to everyone is probably the part that kills people. But you still have to start. And so to your point, right? If we had these things, what business outcomes could we achieve that we're not currently achieving, right? So if we tried to solve the security problem and had an inventory of everything on the network, we could say, okay, cool, we know what all our devices are, relatively speaking. We know what patch level they're on, right? But the biomed guy down the hall doesn't care about either of those. He wants to know where they are because, to your point, the location of the device is about as important as the operating system version. For him, he needs to go pull defective equipment or something that's gotten pulled down, or an advisory or a recall has been posted that he needs to go that. So the inventory in his case is, well, I need the geo coordinates of that equipment. I need to know where it is, right? So I think, we see these approaches to try to identify specific data points for an inventory that would matter to a specific set of use cases without looking across. And when we think about solutions that actually can work and provide value, many security solutions already provide the value in the clinical context and some of the other contexts that are needed to make them truly valuable. Like to your point, right? Like how could a large HDO, with 150 hospitals across the U.S., leverage security technology to solve a device shortage issue? Well, it could very easily take that same data on what OS are we running, what's the type of equipment, and where is it, and source that to actually provide biomed teams and distribution teams the ability to collect and move equipment around strategically to actually serve needs and help patients. It's definitely something that's being thought of. I haven't seen great success because people are still working off those Excel-based inventories, right, to figure out where stuff is, and God knows where half the like the last time somebody saw, that the IV pump, that was on floor 6 and buried in the corner. There's still some of those problems, but security technology actually has the capability of helping with some of these problems, and I've seen good approaches and novel approaches for people doing this.
For me, the journey is you go from an inventory to be able to risk manage that inventory, preferably by class of assets, so that you'll never get all the Fitbits, or actually this isn't a little oximeter. You'll never get to the point that you've got the perfect inventory, and you probably shouldn't be chasing those lesser value assets. But
Totally.
Work on the ones that are literally saving lives. So you do visualization, you do risk management. The next piece for me is the segmentation piece. To avoid the ransomware, you don't want to have your whole hospital obviously on the same segment, and to allow one of these things to take out an infusion pump. How are you seeing people adopting a smarter segmentation strategy? There's so many
I think
assets here.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the industry's taken the opinion that once I segment, I'm done, right? Like this is like every piece of literature you'll read out on the internet when it comes to IoT security and medical devices within that definition. They'll say best practice, and also the only control we can think of is to segment the network that those things are on. And to your point, right? That's like risk management with a baseball bat. You're only hitting the ball or missing the ball. So to me, there's more that needs to go into it. So we mentioned crown jewels a moment ago. I would argue, so there's some data out there that says for any hospital, for every bed, there's about 10 to 15 devices. So the fleet is massive, I guess is my point. Trying to manage an IoT or medical IoT deployment is not about managing all of the fleet, to your point. It's managing the parts of the fleet that matter the most. And so there is a risk assessment process you need to go through to identify, you can do all the fuzzy walkthroughs and see this stuff, but you need to obviously identify based on data the most critical assets. And so questions that I've asked myself in the past are, okay, well, what are those, right? What class of medical device are they, right? So the class matters. It is a direct translation to the clinical role it serves or plays. How out of date is it, or is it in date? Do we know who the vendor is? What do we do if it goes down? Right? What happens to a patient if it turns off or turns up, right? Because the answers to those questions matter a great deal when you're talking about implanted cardiac devices, right? But you can get to these key data points around safety and quality and clinical delivery, and using methods like FAIR, get down to, hey, I've got 50,000 medical devices, but there's probably only 10 I really care about, right? And then for the 49,990. That one segmentation approach might work, right? And you see people, you see smart people doing policy-specific segmentation based on device class or device type, like put respirators on one segment, put others on another segment, and that's okay, right? That's better than what most people are doing. But to really get to the right answer on segmentation for IoT, it's smartly capturing and putting together devices of like technology and like treatment, so that the risk that they present to a patient and to themselves isn't so much that it requires you to, so if something were to go down or you have a problem, that the impact would be local. It would be one, not everything, and it would be, as hopefully as managed as possible in the case of safety outcomes. but you need to segment based on the safety level you require, not necessarily because segmentation is a good idea. The other piece that most are not yet getting to but need to is like understanding what is good behavior and bad behavior between devices in a segment. So like what should be talking to what shouldn't be, what is anomalous traffic, and really getting on the anomalous traffic side of things. Because you may not be able to get on the device and configure it, you may not be able to confirm it has antivirus, but you can tell if it's behaving normally or not. And that piece of monitoring the health of the device on an ongoing basis combined with segmentation, I think is a reasonable strategy. But most people are still saying, yeah, device segment, let's make it like the guest Wi-Fi and just put everybody on it, right? That's not smart.
I love that point in terms of what's going on within this segment, not a medical example, but just because cash registers could talk to each other and they're in the same class, there's no reason that they should talk to one another. They should only talk to controllers. That's
one cash register might matter. One cash register might matter than more than the other.
Sure. Oh, I see Peter hopping on. Everything okay, Peter? Yep.
Yeah, we've got a couple.
So Taylor, you mentioned class matters, and I agree, and that's why we have you here. But also maybe just sort of in closing, mission matters is a theme. Hashtag mission matters that you and I have bonded over. Can you just maybe share with the group what mission matters means to you, and what I think or what you think it should be as a calling for our industry as a whole?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of well-intentioned people out there, but there are some that aren't. Mission Matters came out of the need to better align what we as cybersecurity people are doing and what we're buying and spending our money on to align with the reason our companies exist in the first place. And for me, it was especially acute when I had to go spend and work on cybersecurity problems. I had to basically fight against spending that money on other things and picking time on security projects over others. And my prioritization factor that I came to realize happened to be more of like, how does what I do contribute to the mission? How does putting segmentation down on the network make people safer, right? And I need to be able to argue and articulate what I do as a healthcare CISO to be cast in the patient outcomes, patient safety, financial health of an organization. So in order to really attract me to an idea or a purchase or a strategy, I really needed it to be talked about in a way that aligned to my mission. And so Mission Matters is all about finding a way to communicate value and prioritize work and determine strategies that deliver the outcomes that my business needs. Not what might be important or cool at the time, but in my case, and many of the folks on this call, it's about safety and quality, right? And that's what our goal is as CISOs. That goes into every decision we make, and that includes purchasing decisions.
Couldn't have said it better.
Yeah, and give blood.
We have a couple of questions if you're to that point yet.
Sure. Yeah, happy to take a question. Taylor's probably got a better shot at answering it correctly, but I'll take a stab too.
All right. So is there an intersection between IoT and CMDB in this space? In other words, are you having to track all the devices as a normal shop, quote unquote, but track all the servers and workstations?
I'll take a stab. I mean, when I look at it, regardless of sector, I look at IoT as the space of you've got managed, and you've got maybe a quadrant: managed and unmanaged, unmanageable and manageable, right? And I think there's a different strategy for each one. I love what I'm hearing from you folks in the healthcare sector of a whole hospital approach. I don't believe the silos have served us well in terms of IT versus IT versus OT versus IoT versus IoMT. Those silos are where we have gaps, and that's where bad things happen and bad things lurk. So I think a whole hospital, whole network, enterprise-wide approach that addresses all four of those quadrants of manageable and managed, I think is the right way to go. Taylor?
Totally agree. Yeah.
Very good. We've got one more question, if you would like.
Sure.
Have you had any success bringing traditional IT, networked medical devices, industrial control systems, and other IoT, for example, security cameras, together in a comprehensive view?
So there's never 100% of the time that I can attach to any answer that I ever give, but the way I would say it is accomplished, and having felt I did a pretty good job at this, I would say I was perfect, but having approached it like it's a top-down problem as opposed to a bottom-up problem, kind of as Rich kind of was just articulating, is how you get there. You know, the reality in hospitals and medical systems, for the most part, not to say the same for payers, it works a little differently, but taking the top-down view, understanding where risks are, diving into the risk areas, and including inventory as a control to understand and measure risk. I think it serves to having the right strategy. It may not be, like I said, the goal of a security strategy as it relates to IoT is not control all the IoT. It's the same for a corporate IT strategy. It's not to control all the IT. It's to control the IT that matters. And trying to figure out what matters starts with, you know, top-down, understanding business context, strategy, goals, outcomes, et cetera, where things could go wrong, and driving to a defensible strategy that mitigates the greatest amount of risk with the resources you have. You know, I would argue firmly against you need to secure every single thing on the network the same way, or even that you need to secure everything on the network. You need to secure the things that matter, and that gets you to a comprehensive strategy. This is where things like, you know, the FAIR method will help you figure things like that out. But again, you got to roll up your sleeves and get out there and understand your business to actually have a shot at even having a defensible strategy for endpoint servers, desktop, laptop, like whatever, right? Whatever it is.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that, Taylor, I wouldn't look at it from a technology process up. Sorry, from a technology stack up. I'd be looking at it from a process down. You've got a surgical floor. You've already got an HVAC system in there doing air filtration. Maybe it's negative pressure. From a process standpoint of what that doctor needs at that very moment, that's probably going to have an IT, an IoMT, an OT component. So we need to look at it from a mission perspective, I think, just to go full circle and bring the security component to that mission as part of a broader offering.
All right, very good. I think we're about out of time. As we wrap up day one today, I want to thank all of our presenters, sponsors, and attendees. And thank you all for joining us as we make it through these difficult times. Great that we can create forums to discuss these issues and to hear from your peers. I would encourage everyone to stay connected for the peer-to-peer virtual networking here in the general session. And then tomorrow, the lobby will be open at 12 o'clock Eastern. Until then, have a great evening, and we'll see you tomorrow. Thanks.